So what's the deal with all the different chapters? A lot of chapters. There's 7, 11, 13, 9, 12, and 15. What do all those mean? Well, we're not going to talk about all of those, but we will talk about the important ones. All right? Let's talk about 7. What is a Chapter 7? I'm sure you guys have heard about a Chapter 7. But a Chapter 7 is basically, it is a liquidation of all of your debts. First and foremost, it's available to individuals and companies. And what Chapter 7 does, it takes the debt that you have and it breaks it up to 2 buckets. Bucket 1 is what we call unsecured debt. Credit cards, medical bills, things like that. The secured debt are things like your mortgage or your car. If you don't pay something, they could take it away. So what it does is all your unsecured debt goes away. Provided you get a discharge, it all goes away. Your secured debt, you have no legal obligation to pay it. However, if you want to keep your house or if you want to keep your car, then you have to pay the debt. There's a distinction there. You don't have to pay it, so if you want to hand your car in, you're absolutely fine. If you want to hand your home in, absolutely fine. You're not responsible for it. But if you want to keep it, you got to pay it. All right? The amount of debt you have is absolutely irrelevant. I've had clients that have had millions of dollars in debt, kind of rising out of real estate, but it happens all the time. It's not uncommon for clients to have $80, $90, $100,000 in credit card debt. It happens all the time. And the means test. The means test is something that you have to be able to qualify for a Chapter 7. For example, if you are a real estate agent and you just happen to be making $150,000, it's unlikely you'll be able to qualify for a Chapter 7 because for a Chapter 7, you take a look at your income and you take a look at your expenses, you put it through this mathematical formula, and it'll say yes, you qualify, or no, you don't. One of my jobs as an attorney is to do our best and sometimes be creative about getting people to actually qualify for a Chapter 7. But not anybody and everybody can go for a Chapter 7. You have to meet certain criteria, and sometimes it's kind of hard. Okay, Chapter 11. Chapter 11 will be, we'll talk about this briefly. Chapter 11 is what I call a customized reorganization plan. All right, so let's just say, and this is more for companies, let's just say you have a big company and they have a lot of debt and they want to continue to do business, but they have to restructure their debt in a way in which they can actually be in business. All right, so what we do in a Chapter 11 is we take your debt and we reorganize it and oftentimes reduce it, and we submit a plan to the bankruptcy court. We say, this is the plan we propose. And if we follow this plan, then at the end of that plan, all of our debt is what we call a discharge. I'll give you an example. So a company owes $1 million in debt to various creditors. And we submit a plan to the court saying, of this $1 million, we're going to pay back $300,000 of it. And some creditors may not like it, but for various reasons, we can kind of force the creditors to take it. And the court says, you know what? I agree with your plan. I approve it. So provided we actually satisfy that plan, meaning we pay the money within the time frame that we agreed to, then the $1 million, all we have to pay back is $300,000. It's typically very expensive because to actually do one of these types of chapters, bankruptcies, because you actually have to prepare a customized plan, you have to work with the courts, you have to work with the creditors, and a lot of folks individually, they're eligible for a Chapter 11, but they can't really do it most of the time because it's just so expensive. But for those folks who actually are like really high net worth individuals, they can't do a Chapter 7, they'll do a Chapter 11 because they'll take their debts and they'll put into an organized plan and pay it within a period of time. So that's Chapter 11. Last one is a Chapter 13. And Chapter 13s and Chapter 11s are similar in that number 13 is, think of it as a kind of a cookie cutter plan. Instead of a customized plan, you're going to repay your debts basically either 3 or 5 years. It's everything's standardized, much cheaper. But the good thing about a 13, especially for a lot of folks who actually don't qualify for a 7, is they can take all their debt and they can put into a plan that if they fulfill that plan, their debt is done. The challenging aspect about a 13, though, is that there's limits. If you have more than $175,000 in what we call unsecured debt, you don't qualify. You're not eligible for it. And with respect to the secured debt, if you're over $1,149,525, you don't qualify. So a lot of folks who don't qualify for a 7 go, well, I'll do a 13. And we'll say, great. Do you have a home? Yeah, I do. Well, how much do you owe? I have $1.2 million. Well, you don't qualify for a 13 because you have too much debt. So you have to go to an 11. And they'll say, well, how much does 11 cost? Well, it's a lot more than the 13. So that's kind of the quandary. But those are kind of, for a typical person, those are the 3 chapters that we kind of look at when we sit down and talk to someone. All right. Now for the other chapters.
Can I just?
Oh, yeah, please.
Are there income limitations on 11 and 13?
Good question. So are there income limitations on 11 or 13? Good question. To answer your question, no. And the reason why is this. When you think about what your plan's going to be, you look at 2 general criteria, your income and your expenses. If you're making a lot of income, your plan payments are going to be higher. If you make lower income, your plan payments are going to be lower. However, you at least have to show to the court, I have enough income to at least make the minimum plan payment. So if you're going to say, well, I'll pay, let's just say I'm an individual, and I'll say, well, I'm going to pay back this plan at $1,500 a month. All right? But my disposable income after my income versus my expenses, my extra income was only like $500. Well, the court's going to say, well, you want to pay back $1,500 a month, but your extra income is only $5. You can't afford this. And they're not going to what they call confirm the plan. It's a problem. So, answer your question?
Yes.
Good. All right. Yes?
Back to the Chapter 7 liquidation, the means test.
Yeah.
Could you go into more of what that is?
Sure.
What are the qualifications?
Sure. All right. Think of the means test as kind of an algebraic equation. To go back to algebra. You take into consideration 2 general criteria. Look at your income. But income isn't just what you should get in your paycheck. It could be money that people give to you. It could be expenses that people pay for you. It's monies that you receive in some way, shape, or form. That's on one side of the ledger. Then you look at your expenses. Where it gets tricky, though, is there are your actual expenses. Then there are expenses that the Bankruptcy Code says this is the maximum you can take, given who you are and where you live. Let me give you an example. You want to file bankruptcy, and you just rented a home in Newport Beach for $7,000 a month, and you're going to qualify for a 7, all right? Because you make $8,000 a month, and you with your rental income, with your lease payments and all your other expenses, you're actually negative each month. All right? Well, what the Bankruptcy Code says, you can't use that $7,000 a month for purposes of the means test. Rather, you have to use, let's say you're leasing, you have to use some predetermined formula which we're going to give you. So if you're a husband and wife and 2 kids, and you're in this geographical area, the most you can use for purposes of a rent is, I'm using a number, $2,000. So you have to look at those 2 criteria. However, and this is where it's really helpful if you own property, for purposes of the means test if you own property, you incorporate your mortgage and your property tax and your insurance. So you can have someone making $12,000 a month, but they own like 4 homes, all right? Some of them might be vacant at the time, and we can kind of get them into a Chapter 7 despite they make some pretty good money because we can use all those expenses on that side and make it so it works.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of play value in the 7.
Tremendously. Yeah, and so I'll have clients sometimes and I'll say, listen, you don't qualify for a 7. And they'll say, well, why? I said, well, you're making too much money. All right, and so we think about what can we do within the confines, of course, of the law, but be creative to get you into a 7. give you another example. Teachers, let's say they get paid 10 months out of the year. Let me back up. For the means test, you look at your income over the last 6 months. That's the key thing. The income over the last 6 months. So you could be making $1 million last year, but you lost your job. And over the last 6 months, you've made next to nothing. Well, that's the criteria that you use. Some teachers, if they get paid 10 months out of the year, and they want to file bankruptcy, well, those last 6 months, 2 of the months, they're not going to have a paycheck. That's how it works, really. And it's, yeah, bankruptcy for purpose of filing is all about timing. And it's ethical, it's moral, it's just being thoughtful about how you use the system ultimately to help you in time of need. Good question, though. Yeah, so the means test ultimately, it's a pretty complicated analysis, but the important thing is using that in a way to ultimately get you into a 7. I have some clients who will say, you know what, no matter what we'll do, you just make too much money. This is how it is. Other clients, it's close. Sometimes husband and wife are working. And I'll say, you know what, if your wife doesn't work for 3 months, it's going to work. So she doesn't work for 3 months or something like that. So he says be creative about how it works. But it's all about timing.
Silly question. What's the lowest amount you've ever dealt with for any of them? Like, you know, we're talking millions of dollars that they're trying to write off, but what's the low end? What has ever?
Oh, for bankruptcy?
Yeah.
All right. Good question.
Story.
Yeah, a lot of stories. When folks come to my office, I say, you know, you're going to fall into one of 3 buckets. You're going to fall into, yeah, bankruptcy makes a lot of sense for you, or no, bankruptcy does not make a lot of sense for you, or maybe. And so if someone comes to me, I'll give you an example, real life example. It was a college kid who owed like $20,000. And I was like, you know what? You're in college, and $20,000 is a lot of money, but not really. In the big picture, why don't you just work it out and just, you know, because is it worth filing bankruptcy when you're in your early 20s over $20,000? And that was my advice, that you probably shouldn't do it. But he was just determined to file, and I'm not going to say I'm not going to take your money. so we filed, but that's a situation where I thought, you know what, do you really need it? And ultimately, for various reasons, he felt he did. And so we filed. Yeah, but most folks, you know, it's $50, $60, $80, $100,000 in credit card debt that, or they have properties. And that's, especially nowadays, that's really been a big issue. People having real estate that's completely underwater, like, well, how in the heck do I get out of this mess that I'm in? So, and bankruptcy is a good tool. We'll talk about one.